and I will go ahead, and we've got the recording started. So we will turn it over to Colonel Kelly to begin with opening remarks.
Okay, Heather, I have the big red letters. Are you sure we're recording?
Yes.
We're good. Okay. Welcome to everyone for our quarterly RAC meeting. This is our third official one. We've been meeting more than that, but wanted to thank everyone for your patience. My name is Colonel Mark Kelly. I'm the Stewart Air National Guard base co-chair, along with the community co-chair, Chuck Thomas. We will continue to have this meeting and press forward and share information as best we can. I apologize for the sun bouncing off my bald head. I guess I could try to turn a little bit, but I don't want to talk long. The agenda is in front of you. We got a packed agenda and we have limited time, so I'm not going to belabor the point too much. So thanks for your patience again with doing the online. Unfortunately, COVID continues to affect us all in so many ways, and this is another one of those accommodations that we have to make. I did want to cover one key point that the RAC has been asking for quite some time for a tour of the base, in particular RAC Pond, and apologize for the delay on getting that answer. We have gotten the green, the thumbs up to have that tour once COVID conditions allow for it. If there were no COVID, we could go ahead and do it. But right now, the base is at a health protection level that restricts non-DOD members. In fact, my own family members are prohibited from coming on base at the moment. So as the COVID conditions allow, and as we're starting to be able to bring more people on base that way, we can press forward with a tour. So we're eager to do that. We're eager to show the progress that's been made. Having said that, there's a big agenda with a site inspection update, a REC pond update, and I don't want to belabor the point too much. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Chuck, for your opening comments. Over.
Thank you, Colonel Kelly. I'm thrilled to learn that we'll be able to get a tour. I was going to advocate for a virtual tour, and I think that sun on your forehead tells me you're in Arizona also. I'm quite sure. So anyway, thank you. We had hoped to share a document that was kind of an overview of what the purpose of the RAC is, and hopefully before this is done, we'll be able to get that up and shared somehow. Mary's working on that. But that said, I just want to talk very briefly for those that are new with us. We have it in Spanish up there, okay. Who are new with us, this has been a wonderful thing too, that we've added a Spanish translation to this, and that this is being live streamed as well for everybody to access it. So under the, before I start though, I also want to note that Luis Rivera Gonzalez is with us tonight, and he is from the Federal Agency of Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, and they are the ones that are doing the health survey for PFOSs in the city of Newburgh, as well as 8 other locations around the country. And I thank Luis for joining us today and for being available. And he's not an official RAC member, but he is joining us to lend his insights and to help him to steer their investigations as they come back to Newburgh to sample approximately 400 people to create a database of information about the health of Newburgh residents. That'll happen in the fall. That said, okay, so under the Comprehensive Environmental Review and Cleanup Liability Act, the CERCLA process, a Restoration Advisory Committee has been formed by the members of this community to take the opportunity to influence cleanup decisions through discussion and to provide input to the installation decision makers. In January 2020, a RAC was formed, a Restoration Advisory Council, with input from the community and local stakeholders with the Stewart Air National Guard. The first RAC meeting was February 2020. We're now at the third of these meetings, today being July 29th, 2020, and we have made significant progress on very many levels, and I'm thrilled with the cooperation that has been developed and the camaraderie and collegiality that's been developed among the RAC participants. As co-chair, I represent the Community RAC, which is a diverse and knowledgeable group of 15 citizen volunteers representing our area. Some members have decades of experience in environmental cleanup. The larger combined RAC includes the Restoration Advisory Council, includes the additional group consisting of representatives of the Stewart Air National Guard, our local governments, and state and county agencies. The RAC contributes its community's perspective in planning and implementing environmental restoration of the contaminated watersheds that are affecting our community's drinking water supplies and ecological well-being with focus on drinking watersheds and additional off-site locations. The mission of the RAC is to influence cleanup decisions through discussion and to provide input to the Air National Guard decision makers. Because representatives of the environmental agencies overseeing cleanup participate in the RAC offers members and the public the opportunity to share their questions, concerns, and ideas with the agencies involved in the cleanup. The RAC has identified additional questions that will contribute to our success with this collaborative effort. We, the Community RAC, expect to use this opportunity to advance new materials and queries as we go along and introduce them into our proceedings. And that said, again, I want to commend the RAC members, all the RAC members who have volunteered on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, with the contributions that they've made and how much progress we have made already with this initiative. So thank you very much for being here. And thank everybody out in the audience that's listening. We have, what about 66 now? I'm looking at 84 attendees. So thank you all for being here. We're hoping for 100. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Colonel Kelly.
Thank you so much. So let us, we're going to get switched over to our main presentation now. So just give us a moment for that. But while I do that, I would just like to, again, thank everyone who is here. And it looks like we still might have a couple people trying to get in, but hopefully everything is on board. I would just like to remind everybody, as individuals speak, we are being recorded not only online, but then also we have a court reporter on who will be taking a transcript of tonight's discussions and presentations. So please make sure to state your name before speaking so that it can get recorded. My name is Heather Pfeiffer, and I am a contractor with the Air National Guard with Burrs Weston, and I'll be helping to facilitate tonight. Next slide, please. And this is a list of our team. Since Elaine is on, I don't know if you want to go over some of those introductions, Elaine?
Well, certainly, Heather. I'm Elaine Magdenick. I have taken a new position since we last met. I'm now the Chief of the Environmental Division. I oversee not only the restoration, the cleanup branch, but also the environmental quality branch, which handles the environmental compliance, conservation, and pollution prevention. We have Mr. Robert Subsavage, who is our Chief of Environmental Quality Branch, Nicole Wireman, who was the New York Restoration Program Manager. You already saw Colonel Kelly, who's with the Stewart Air National Guard Base, Mike Ottinger, who's the Environmental Manager at Stewart, Master Sergeant Sarah Pastorello, who's our Public Affairs Officer, and then we have our Corps of Engineers team, Jeremy Alea, Michelle Lordeman, and Eric Yeager, and then our contractors, Burrs Weston and Wood are online.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Next, we have a list of our RAC members, and we'll go over them. I believe a number of them are with us tonight. We have Ramona Burton, John Clark, Anthony Fern. We had a last minute change, so we have Tal Gluck will kind of go over that tonight. Carl Johnson, Edward Lawson, Ora Lopez Zorat, Cynthia Mack, Laura Patricia Garcia Balvin, Cassie Skylars, Mana Jo Green with Hudson River Sloop Clearwater, Inc., Mary Wagner with the Newburgh Clean Water Project, Chuck Thomas, who spoke earlier with the Newburgh Conservation Advisory Council, Victoria Lung, Riverkeeper, Jack Caldwell with Quasi Creek Watershed Alliance. We also have our government representatives, Colonel Kelly that we saw earlier, Stewart Air National Guard Base. We have Keith Miller with Orange County, Anthony Grice with the City of Newburgh, and our representative from the town of New Windsor, and that is Patrick Hines. We do also have some other representatives. I know that we do have our representative from Senator Schumer's office, as well as Chuck mentioned, a representative from ATSDR. I believe we saw, I saw on our list tonight, Wendy Kuhner from the New York State Department of Health, Justin Starr from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. I believe we were also having some individuals from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. It looks like Elizabeth Rojak is on, and possibly a couple others. So to all of you who are here, thank you so much. If I missed you, I'm sorry for overlooking your names, but we always appreciate your participation in the RAC. Next slide. So we've gone over our welcome from our two different co-chairs. We're going to be going into some of our RAC business. That will be followed by the environmental updates. And we'll be covering the expanded site inspection, the interim stormwater treatment system for PFOS, PFOA. We'll also have an update on the community involvement plan update that is starting, and the Department of Defense and State Memorandum of Agreement and the National Guard Bureau. That will be followed by our RAC discussion. And then again, we're committed to providing the 20 minutes at the end for public questions. The way questions will go, as they did at our last meeting, we are asking that RAC members, if they have a question, to raise your hand. There will be time, 5 minutes allotted at the end of each discussion topic for RAC questions, and we will unmute you as you raise your hand to ask those questions. Hopefully we'll pack as much as we can into 5 minutes for that. And then the same with the open discussion at the end. For members of the public, there is a question module in the go-to setting. We ask that you type your questions in, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can during that last 20 minutes. Any questions that we don't get to, we will cover at the end. Next slide. Or I would say, any questions we don't get to at the end, next slide, we will download and provide a written response. Sorry about that. Next slide. Again, we kind of covered some of these meeting notes. A couple other items. As we said, all phones are muted. Another reminder, please introduce yourself before speaking so that it can be recorded. And once we get to the open discussion part for the RAC, we do ask that those members raise their hands, try to limit comments to 3 minutes or less. We don't have a lot of time tonight as we get through everything, but we definitely want to try to address all of those questions. And again, enter any questions into that question module, and we'll work to answer as many of those as possible or provide that written response after the meeting. Next slide. Here are the list of our upcoming meetings. We have the next meeting will be Wednesday, October 28th. Our desire is to meet in person once again, but as we've all learned, the ongoing COVID situation may prevent that. So we will try to get the information out in advance if it will once again be a virtual meeting, or hopefully we'll be able to meet in person at the Armory. The meeting after that will be February 3rd. And then we are proposing the meeting after that, sticking with our schedule of every 3 months, is for April 28th, 2021. And if we have the agreement of our RAC for that April 28th date, we will set that in stone. Next slide. And I would like to turn things over to Mary Wagner to discuss this next slide. Mary, I think you can unmute yourself.
Thanks, Heather. Actually, can I invite Aura to introduce Mark? She's on this evening.
Oh, sure. Let me.
Thank you.
Aura, I think you are open to unmute yourself as well.
Hello, can you all hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, so I want to introduce Mark Sanchez Potter, and we as the RAC committee want him to fill Tel's Glock seat. He has resigned his position on the RAC, so we want to have Mark Sanchez Potter to fill Tel's seat. He's well known in our community, and a lot of his work is around environmental justice. So I'm very happy to introduce him, and we want to do a vote on this nomination. Mary, if you have anything to add, you can add.
Thanks, Aura. Mark is a Food and Water Watch organizer. He's also a substitute teacher with our city schools, Newburgh Enlarged City School District. And he's actually been an alternate before on the RAC. So we're so happy to have him, and thank you to Tal for all his contributions.
Yes, thank you, Tal. We appreciate the work that you have put in the first part of our RAC, and I hope that your other commitments go well. I would like to ask all of the RAC members at this time to please use the raise your hand feature if you agree with appointing Mark Sanchez Potter into Tal Gluck's position. And we will take a quick poll from our members. So it looks like we do have a majority of our members. Thank you so much. You can now put your hands down and welcome Mark to the RAC. We look forward to having you be part of this committee. Next slide, please. I would like to provide a quick update. I know we've been slowly working on the operating procedures. I know on the Air National Guard's end, as well as the community RAC members, a lot of time has gone into really reviewing, providing comments, and a lot of discussion about these operating procedures. We are getting closer, I think, to agreement about some of the language. I wanted to provide a quick update. The responses from the Air National Guard to the comments that the RAC made were submitted to Chuck Thomas on the 28th of April. We received the Air National Guard received comments back on the 20th of July, along with a request to have a meeting on the 24th of July to discuss them. Unfortunately, due to some scheduling conflicts, that meeting was rescheduled to July 31st. The Air National Guard also sent some additional language regarding RAC subcommittees, which will be discussed as part of that July 31st meeting. I know that there was a request to have some time to discuss the operating procedures a little bit tonight, but we wanted to make sure we were able to get through our presentation. So if we have some time, they might come up, but for right now, since we're having that meeting on Friday, our focus is really on getting through tonight's discussion topics. And so we appreciate Chuck, Mary, and Victoria who've been working on those, and your willingness to meet with us and hopefully get those finalized before the next RAC meeting. Next slide. So I would like to welcome now Nicole Wireman, who will start off the discussion on our environmental projects.
Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Nicole Wireman, and I'm the Restoration Program Manager for Stewart. I thank all of you for being here tonight and welcome you. We know you all have busy schedules, and we definitely appreciate your being here to get more information on the environmental projects going on at Stewart. So if I can advance to the next slide, I'm going to start talking. We've provided for you a administrative record, quick navigation aids in this slide. At the last meeting, we talked to you about our online AR or admin record, and you can see the URL link for that above the table. And we talked to you about how to access all the CERCLA documents we have for Stewart in the online AR. What we've done with this navigation aid is provide you some of the ones that we thought you most might want to look at, some of the most recent documents on all our sites. One thing I did want to note in the first row is at the last meeting we provided AR numbers, admin record numbers for the SI report for PFAS, PFOA, and those did change since our last meeting. That is a highly unusual thing. We don't normally change AR numbers, and I won't go into the reasoning as to why, because there is an AR number in that third column, which you can access to get an understanding of why we changed those numbers if you're so interested. The other point I wanted to make on this slide is in the very last row, you'll see that there are the April 2020 RAC meeting materials, and so those have been posted online as well. But particularly I wanted you to see in the third column again that out of that April meeting, we did have 65 questions submitted to us based on the meeting, and we worked very hard to develop written answers to every one of the 65 questions. And so those answers were provided to RAC members, but we also made them available to the public. And so right there listed is the AR number. And we highly encourage you to go and take a look at those questions and those responses and to refer to those as needed. If by chance your questions don't get answered tonight, you can look in there, and it's very possible that the question was already included in the list from the last meeting. So with that, we're going to proceed on to our environmental projects. We're starting out with the expanded SI, and Mr. Kerry Toll from Wood will be speaking. You might remember last time he presented primarily the stormwater study information on the expanded SI, and this time he's going to be covering the rest of the work that took place under the expanded SI. We are right now at the draft final report stage, and we are our goal is to be at the final report stage by the end of September. So as soon as the final report is out, we will again post that to the online AR, and everybody will be able to access it there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kerry. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole, and thanks everyone attending this evening. I will go through these slides. I'm going to try and keep a time on this of about 15 minutes because we've got 4 things that we need to go over. So the initial phases of the site inspection displayed PFAS and PFOA greater than the LHA. The Lifetime Health Advisory is a EPA level for drinking water, and this was encountered in 3 areas of the base: the west-southwest portions of the base, east-southeast near the former base landfill, Site 3, and the current fire station, Building 104. These results showed PFAS in stormwater flows from the base to surface water, in Rec Pond, to Silver Stream, with the potential to flow to Lake Washington, a drinking water source. It's important to note that the flow from Silver Stream, from Rec Pond to Silver Stream down to Lake Washington has been shut off essentially since 2016. There's a diverter box, and this was confirmed with the Newburgh Water Department. The Air National Guard implements short-term response actions when ANG identifies drinking water with the most typical, most prominent PFAS compounds, PFOS and PFOA. above the LHA as a result of past mission activities, e.g. provides alternate drinking water sources, filtration systems, bottled water. In 2018, the New York State completed construction of a drinking water treatment system at Lake Washington, which treats water to below LHA. Therefore, a response action for drinking water has occurred. Next slide, please. So, previous SI reports. It's important to understand, and I've got another slide that helps provide this in a table format. The expanded site inspection is the third in a suite of site inspections we've been working on. Further evaluated the groundwater and surface water pathways for PFAS to Rec Pond, monitored dry weather and storm weather, wet weather flow volume, and PFAS load at outfalls to and from Rec Pond. It developed a stormwater model, a very baseline stormwater model, and PFAS load estimates. It assessed groundwater, surface water pathways for PFAS to Lake Washington if the flow was still going down to it. It evaluated soil and groundwater at potential release locations, PRLs, and especially PRL 16, which is a nozzle testing area that had not been previously assessed, but we took advantage of the ESI to take a look at PRL 16. Next slide, please. So this ESI, it represents an expansion of previous activities by over 50%. So the initial SI had wells installed, groundwater samples were taken. Stormwater was not a focus at that point because a site inspection truly is looking for the presence or absence of PFAS. Where is it? Where is it? Surface water and sediment samples taken, and at that time, 75 soil samples were taken. Soil is often viewed up front as a potential source because PFAS comes to rest on the surface soil where it's been tested or where it's been sprayed, and through rain can become a source to the groundwater. The addendum after that was a brief look, a follow-up look at further well installation, further groundwater samples, and getting into surface water some more. Again, well, not sediment and soil at that time, but it was a culmination of that addendum 2019 that we decided the Guard really wanted to take an expanded look at the site inspection, and this is pretty unprecedented for the basis that I've worked on. But this resulted, as you can see, in more wells installed, more groundwater, a lot of stormwater sampling, because that's what largely this is turned to be, surface water, sediment, and soils. So in total, we've got over 300 samples of a variety of media across the board there. So when we speak about the soil samples taken at the base, I want to make sure that we're focusing or that we look at all of the phases of the SI that were conducted here. Next slide, please. New PFAS screening levels have recently been adopted from the new EPA risk tables and were quickly adopted by the 2019 Department of Defense guidance. These new screening levels for water, specifically PFAS and PFOA, reduced the lifetime health advisory from 70 parts per trillion down to a screening level of 40 parts per trillion. The PFBS is 40,000 parts per trillion. This was a reduction from 400,000 parts per trillion. And new screening levels were introduced for soil and sediment, and these are represented here. They're order of magnitude reductions, both for PFAS, PFOA, as well as PFBS. Next slide, please. So, as these were or are the compounds for which we have screening levels, we assessed the range of compounds that were found for all the samples that were taken across the 3 site inspection phases through the 2 SIs as well as the ESI. And as you can see, the prominent compound that was discovered across all media is PFOS. PFOA, mostly in groundwater, stormwater, and surface water, less so in sediment and soil, as it did not trip the screening level for the samples collected for those two media. And then PFBS were not found in or detected in any of the samples taken for any of those media above the new screening level. Next slide. So in our findings, PFAS in groundwater were detected greater than the screening level at isolated and distinct areas, not base-wide. We weren't seeing a large area that you could draw a plume map across the base, linking well after well after well. These were areas that were associated directly with activities where AFFF may have been handled. PFAS are greater than screening levels detected in 4 of the 13 off-base groundwater wells, but at relatively low concentrations, still greater than the screening level. Groundwater infiltration via joints and cracks in underground or adjacent to underground stormwater pipes gives us this continuous PFAS dry weather flow. Groundwater in PRL 16, which was a focus of this most recent expanded site inspection, did not exhibit detections of PFAS greater than SL in any of the media sampled for that PRL. Next slide, please. PFOS and PFOA were consistently detected greater than the SL in catch basins on base during dry weather sampling events. This indicates groundwater is likely infiltrating underground stormwater piping. Stormwater and surface water PFAS concentrations vary on and off base, as each outfall has a unique response during rain events. Surface water in Patton Brook displayed minimal PFAS. East of the thruway, concentrations were within background range. Therefore, a recreation pond has been the primary focus for stormwater sampling. Next slide, please. Stormwater PFAS concentrations from outfall 3 increased in wet weather flow. We believe that this anomaly, if you will, because normally with outfalls, a stormwater event ends up diluting the groundwater that is seeping into it, and you end up with lower PFAS. However, in this case, we believe, as the subnote indicates, PFAS may be driven from surface locations. So it may be trapped or entrained in concrete or asphalt or surfaces that normally don't give off PFAS when it's dry conditions. Stormwater PFAS concentrations from outfall A and 002 decreased during rainfall. This is the normal response that we would expect to see. It supports PFAS that are coming from groundwater, infiltrating into the stormwater pipes, and largely becoming dilute with greater rainfall. Large portion of the stormwater piping is below groundwater level at these two outfalls. Wet weather flow rates from surface water and stormwater produce significant volumes of water that must be incorporated into future design considerations for treatment. A maximum of 47,000 plus gallons per minute leaving Rec Pond in a 2-inch rain event. This indicates significant land and infrastructure reworking would be needed to enable the construction of a suitably sized, long-term, permanent treatment plant to accept water from storm events. Next slide, please. Soil does not appear to be a significant contributing source of PFAS to the base or the overall study. Simply put, soil samples taken across the base and off the base just didn't give us that sense that they're offering a continuing source of PFAS leaching into the groundwater. Soil samples from nozzle testing area PRL 16 did not exhibit PFOS, PFOA, or PFBS greater than the screening level. Therefore, PRL 16 is not a source of PFAS at the base, confirmed by a lack of detection in groundwater at this PRL. Sediment appears to be primarily a PFOS source, as neither PFOA nor PFBS were exhibited in sediment greater than the screening level. Sediment in rec pond likely contributes PFAS to surface water, however, relatively low to insignificant compared to contributions from stormwater and surface water. Next slide, please. So, recommendations. Conduct additional focused dry and wet weather sampling and investigation throughout the study area to better identify PFAS sources. Groundwater, surface water, additional samples to assess nature and extent to include discrete samples during stormwater events to better identify sources for groundwater or surface water both on and off the base. Stormwater, peak flows and volumes due to rain, either through 25, 50, or even 100-year events, which can be used to populate stormwater models started during the expanded SI, and eventually to identify feasible treatment methods in the feasibility study after the remedial investigation. Soil and sediment, sample collection throughout the study area to support focus mitigation if localized sources can be identified, e.g. spot removal. This is especially true in Outfall 3 subcatchment area. Next slide. So, also, to evaluate off-base contributions to rec pond, evaluate drain lines from Stewart International Airport to Outfall A, as well as the late finding of the unidentified outfall to the west of Outfall A. And finally, conduct inspections and sampling upstream of 17K to determine sources and to continue with to work with the New York State DOT to relocate Outfall 17K. So at this time, I'm available to take questions. And that's 13 minutes, so 2 minutes under my goal.
Perfect, thank you. So if our RAC members would raise their hand and we will try to get to you in order. It looks like we have a question here from Anthony Fern. Anthony, let's see. It looks like you are self-muted, Anthony, if you want to unmute. All right, so apparently not. Anthony Grice, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Anthony Grice, Councilman at Large for the City of Newburgh. I actually have several, so I'm going to condense it all and then speak really fast. The last time that we met, I asked if we can have a tour of the site, because looking at a site map sometimes does not give us the full description of what's going on there, and also who owns the property. We understand what happens above the property, but I didn't think it was clear about who owns the property. My other two questions are, it seems like we're using a less restrictive standard for the water and soil sediments. And so it's the community's desire that we use the most restrictive requirements for that. And also my final question is, what are you going to do about the groundwater infiltration and sediment in the stormwater pipes? And what is the timeline on that?
So the tour and who owns the property, I won't address those. Go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say, as far as the tour, Mr. Grice, at the beginning of the meeting, Colonel Kelly spoke to a tour and basically said that there is approval to have a tour in the future. However, due to COVID restrictions, it is on hold for the time being. And when those COVID restrictions are lifted, then a tour will be held. So that will happen in the future. As far as the standards, or I believe you said less restrictive, I believe you're referring to the screening levels. And yes. Okay, we previously in the SI, the two original SI and SI addendum, followed EPA's lifetime health advisory. However, in October 2019, DOD used some lower screening levels of 40 parts per trillion for PFAS and PFOA, and 0.13 milligrams per kilogram. Also PFAS, PFOA, first being in groundwater, of course, and the second in soil. We are following that criteria. This is in line with EPA interim guidance that was issued in December 2019. And it is DoD policy to follow those screening levels. It's possible that the state may promulgate different cleanup standards, and those would be assessed at a later time by the Office of the Secretary of Defense.
Go through all of them automatically.
So
Before then.
he had a question about who owns the property as well.
Okay. And as far as who owns the property, it's owned by the Department of Transportation. Or were you talking about, I think you might have been talking about as part of the tour, you wanted to take a look at, for example, the businesses to the north where the 17K line comes from. I believe that might be what you were referring to as part of the tour.
Yes, please.
Okay.
I can add to Nicole's explanation your curiosity regarding why the standard for soil and sediment is so much higher than water. I work with a lot of risk assessors, and from them I garner that it is simply that which one comes in contact with or ingests most readily. So since water is going to be the source by which most, if not all, humans are going to most readily get PFAS into their system, this is why soil and sediment is the risk of exposure to it. That's why the screening level for those media are higher. So.
Okay, thank you. And then my final question was about the soil sediment and the groundwater infiltration and sediment and a timeline on that, and then I'll be done.
Right. So could you reframe your question? You're asking about groundwater to soil and sediment, or?
Yeah, because groundwater infiltration, the last time that we were speaking, there was groundwater infiltration, the sediment in the stormwater pipes, which were contributing to the problem. So I was wondering what was the timeline on that?
So that is going to have to be tackled by the remedial investigation. This SI and ESI program was designed to find and locate where we could, where PFAS compounds were.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Grice, I'd like to address your question on who owns the property. The Air National Guard does not own the property. It's Stewart Air National Guard base. It is leased property. The Air Force leases it, and it's a long-term lease, and then license it back to the Air National Guard. So just to follow on Nicole's response, the property is not owned by the federal government or the Air National Guard.
Thank you.
And I thought we had a question from Ed Lawson, but it looks like he put his hand down. We will next go to Bill Fetter. Oh, nope, there we go, Ed. I see your hand up again. I think if you unmute, we can get to your question.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up a little bit on Councilman Grice's question. Throughout the presentation, I think language is really important and words matter. And I've probably brought this up in previous conversations about the acronyms, and there was some other language today, like minimal and less significant. And I think it would be helpful to have those things sort of explained. And as Councilman Grice was talking about the sediment, I think it was referred to as it was minimal exposure or some expression like that. I'd like to try to get a little bit more clarity about that. And in general, just with the acronyms and explanations, to be clear about it. There are a lot of people, while Chuck Thomas mentioned there are a lot of people that are well-versed, there are also a lot of people that are trying to play catch up. And when you go through and you make comments like minimal and less significant and use a lot of acronyms, it's hard to follow the conversation.
Well taken.
We will try to eke our acronyms out rather than using the acronyms, so thank you.
But specifically, there was a comment about sediment and it being minimal. In other words,
okay.
Okay.
Right. So my explanation was trying to explain that a human being is going to come in contact with or have PFAS into their system, most prominently from ingestion of water. And sediment and soils are, the screening level is much higher for those because it is unlikely, it is physically difficult for you to intake sediment and soil, so much so that you would derive PFAS in enough quantity that it would have a toxic impact to you. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's clear to me. And I understand from when you explained to Councilman Bryce. I guess the point is that we don't, I guess maybe I don't know the science of it, but if it's there, it's not that it's minimal, it's that, my concern is that when you say it's minimal, what does that mean? That means that it doesn't exist in the soil, or that it's minimal risk that it would go from the soil to drinking water. That's my concern, because if it's there, it's not minimal, it's there. But
right.
The chances of it getting into the drinking water, I guess, is your explanation. And that wasn't really clear to me. Is that what you're saying? That is minimal chance that it could be filtrated to the water and thus get to people and cause the issues that we're concerned about?
Correct. There were a lot of soil samples taken, and the data we got back just doesn't exhibit a soils problem for PFAS. So we we're not seeing soils being the source of PFAS. It is in the groundwater and elsewhere that needs to be further explored. That was the outcome of the site inspections.
And if I could just add to what Carrie just said real quickly, just to say that we fully intend to further investigate soil. We're not saying that, that due to what we've done in the SI and the expanded SI, that soil investigation is complete. We're just indicating, based on what we've seen so far in the expanded SI, these are some findings and some, summarizing information that we've gathered.
Thank you, Nicole. Yes, correct.
Thank you. But again, you can see how certain language breeds certain questions, right? When you say minimal, it seems like it's not an issue, but we're still going to investigate it. I just wanted to raise that point. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
So thank you. It looks like our time is up for this group of questions. Unfortunately, I know there's still a few hands raised. If you could please hold those questions to the RAC open discussion, or if you want to make note of those questions and put them into the question module, and hopefully we'll be able to address them at the end. So if we can move on to our next slide. And I think we are coming up on the interim stormwater treatment system, and there's Doug.
Good evening, everyone. Doug Close with Burrs Weston Services, rapid response contractor working on behalf of the Corps of Engineers. I'm going to speak tonight on the pilot study work that was done over the late winter, early spring to get our system reconfigured and back online, with our primary goals of finding configurations to better protect our media and also combat and reduce biofouling through chemical addition. Next slide, please. Kind of small, hard to see, but it's appropriate based on what Carrie was just talking about. This is a figure that shows the outfall structures that come down from the Stewart Airfield as well as the airport. You see outfall 17K on the far right inside the pond footprint. moving left, outfall 3, outfall 2, and outfall A. This is the major outfalls that are received into the sedimentation, or not the sedimentation, the retention stormwater recreation pond. Down at the bottom of the figure, you'll see our footprint of our facility in gray. For those that have been involved and watching the treatment system being built out, we started with 3 containers. The footprint represents now a 4th container. We'll talk about that after the pilot study. But let's move to the next slide. So our timeline, as we said, we went offline last January due to impacts from both stormwater, sedimentation, and increased filing of our media. We immediately began a sampling program of both water quality and evaluating our current media that was still in our system. We took that data and we reviewed that data. We made recommendations, taking information from suppliers, vendors, and designers, and proposed a phase 1 pilot study to be conducted in February and March of this year. That study produced a design and system modification that we'll go over in the month of April. Next slide, please. So quickly moving through that design, we moved right into procuring the system, coordinating with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey for appropriate permitting. And we started to design and order and build our system offsite and get it ready for mobilization and construction. So June 10th, we returned to the rec pond area. We began construction, completed construction by July 10th. And then we started up our system that we now have on July 13th. Before I go into the next slide, we're going to be talking about a recap of the winter pilot study. So stepping back again, February 14th through March 20th, okay, thank you. Yep. So just the timeline reminder. Let's move forward to the bullets. We used the pilot study in the winter to do 2 things. We mobilized a small scale system of sand filters, 1 skid combined with our existing 2 sand filters and a small scale vessel setup of 1 carbon and 2 resin vessels. These vessels, you'll see them in photos, are 10-inch diameter vessels, and they work at a lower loading rate, but serve the same purpose. It allowed us to see the effects of additional pre-treatment through sand filtration, included with our bag filtration, and then monitoring that effect on the media downstream. We also, during that same period, we ran a partial version of our full-scale system. So you've heard us talk about the treatment trains that include the carbon, resin system. So we ran full-scale operations once we started to look at the results of the small-scale operation, and we incorporated our existing system to also run in conjunction with the small scale. The media was not changed, and we'll talk about what we did during maintenance actions, but we used the existing media, and to do that, we included getting into all the vessels, skimming out all the solids and removing the impacted material that we reported in our last meeting from the impacts to the media. We began backwashing, we began releveling, we began eliminating the channeling that was caused during backwashing, and we incorporated both our full scale and our small scale operation to run this month and a half pilot study, really focusing on the effects of additional pretreatment. We also, during that period, were working with and continue to work with the New York DEC to approve a chemical parasitic acid-based biosolid or biocide as a disinfectant to help us combat biofouling, oxidation, and other biological impacts that get into our system. Next slide, please. Next, yeah. So here's a quick shot of our pilot small scale. This is a sand filter skid. When we say skid, it is a combination of two vessels. You can see it on the left-hand side there. So we incorporated this sand filter skid in front of our bag filter system and then split that water and ran it through our small scale and our large scale, and seeing and evaluating the effects of sand filtration in front of our bag filtration. The right-hand photo is a picture of the sand filter skid. The dark tubing on the left-hand side is the influent coming in from the pond, going down through the sand filtration, and then exiting through the other dark pipe in the center that went back through pretreatment in the bag filters. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with the one on the right-hand side. I've been talking about the small scale. So those are your 10-inch diameter vessels. And if we look at them from left to right, we're looking at carbon, resin, resin. It's a replication of our full scale system. So we ran the sand filter skid through bag filtrations and then through our small scale system to evaluate the effects of additional pretreatment, monitoring the pressure, monitoring the effects of the sand filtration, taking PFAS sampling, and reporting that end usage. The photo on the right is a picture of your bag filters. Those housings or trains, as we might call them sometimes, each have, and you can see two of them on the left, there's two of them on the right. They have 5 cylinders inside of each of those. So when the system is reconfigured, we will have 20 bag filters that the water is running through before it goes into the media. Next slide, please. So the big criteria, the big factor, the big thing that we set out to reduce was the turbidity. During the initial startup of our system in December of 2019, we had the unfortunate opportunity that we were really in a storm event cycle. We saw turbidity ranging from 3 to 53 NTUs, which is an acronym for a measure of turbidity in your water. The typical influent for turbidity is like 2 to 6.9. So you can see the difference there between what we experienced during our pilot study and what we encountered during our original run-up from the December 2019 work. Our new sand filter skids were showing successful removal and lowering of our NTUs or turbidities in the water. Combined with our bag filters, we were really achieving the goal of getting the turbidity down to a 1 NTU range. And that is the effective goal to keep our media in good running shape to sustain it. The new sand filter system is going to look like the skid that you saw, and we'll show you a photo of it. The sand filter skid is 2 vessels. So the new sand filter system that's going to be incorporated based on the pilot study results are going to have 5 skids. There's going to be a total of 10 sand vessels in front of our bag filter pre-treatment in our new reconfiguration. Next slide, please. So we worked with the DEC throughout the winter. We were not able to get our parasitic acid into our pilot study during phase 1. We have reached a common ground. We've got a approved dosage rate, and we will be incorporating a small low dose. It's really about 3/4 gallon a day through our regular operations, and that's going to be added, and I'll show you where that's included in the next couple slides to help us fight off the potential for biofouling. Part of our other investigation and things that we're working with DEC and our project team, we're working to have the ability to disinfect in a closed loop system. We don't have that built. We didn't have the need for it, but we have it on the shelf and ready as we get ready for the winter season, where we see turbidity increasing, our flows increasing. We want to be able to service the system, sustain the operation, keep it back online, and don't have to get into shutdowns. So we have some fallback plans for a closed loop biofouling. Next slide, please. We talked about bag filtrations. It was our original and one and only pre-treatment function. What we've done based on the pilot study is we're going to add an existing train. So that again is 4 bag filtration units in our new configuration for a 20 bag filter setup. We'll continue to do releveling and draining and backwashing of our GAC and resin systems. And we'll continue to do automated backwashing and monitoring of all of our media while backwashing. So one of the things that we discovered and learned during the 2019 effort was we were backwashing, but we didn't really investigate the success or the effectiveness of our backwashing. So we're taking new steps in our pre-treatment after backwashing to always make sure that the media is in its right place, it looks appropriate, there's no channeling, and there's no signs of oxidation. Additionally, we are also looking at what is now starting to be our summer conditions. We have a pond weed growing that is a culprit for producing algae. So we have reached out to New York DEC and the Port Authority to submit and get approval for the addition of an aquatic pesticide. It's a typical regional pesticide that will kill aquatic life in the pond without harming the rest of the pond. And we are going to move forward on doing that. That's going to be an extra step that we want to provide in reducing our biofouling. Next slide, please. So going back to the full scale and small scale results, the resin, we had no detections of PFOS, PFOA in our effluent of either of the systems. We did 7 sampling rounds in the small scale, 3 sampling rounds in our full scale. The primary vessels for the train C had levels of 2.3 and 7.3, but we controlled that on the secondary resin. Same with train D. You can see the numbers there. The small scale system showed no signs of oxidation or visual biofouling within the media. The full scale system did show signs of oxidation on the visual inspection, but that was a product of the impact from the 2019 December work. We did not change, a reminder, we did not change our media during the full scale pilot study. We did do aggressive maintenance actions to get it ready for this, but we did not change it until we set up this new configuration. Next slide, please. So following these recommendations and results of our phase 1, we incorporated our designer and their vendors. We put a system together that comprised of 10 sand filters. 2 of those sand filters, or 2 skids, 4 vessels, are going to be coarse sand. That coarse sand has a larger pore size that grabs onto some of the larger sediment, followed by 3 skids, which would be 6 sand vessels with a finer sand to pick up that even smaller particle of sedimentation that's in the water. Concurrently with that system fabrication, we prepared design updates to finalize the location of this new container. It required new interconnections from the pond to the sand filter, back to our pre-treatment, and then again through our media. And we're going to go through a couple photos to represent that. Repeating our schedule, site construction started June 10th. It completed July 10th. And we have since started up the system on July 13th and began commissioning and sampling and are currently running. Next slide. So a figure of the site layout. If you start at the top of the diagram, you're in the recreational pond where we have our intake pump. That influent line runs directly into our new sand filter container. It is started, the water is immediately injected with our biofouling control chemical. It runs through a centrifugal separator that pulls out larger particles and rejects those. That water is then run through those 10 sand vessels, both coarse and fine, to produce a filtered discharge out of the sand filter that then runs back over to our pre-treatment building, which contains 2 trains of bag filters. We use a combination of larger pore size through smaller pore size and a combination of single ply and double ply bags to get the best effect of sediment removal. Then it runs through our 2 treatment trains. Again, remember each container has 2 trains within it for a total of 4 trains, each train being a GAC vessel, a primary resin vessel, and a secondary resin vessel. Those 2 treatment structures, those 4 trains combine and then are jointly discharged to the outfall structure. Let's go to the next slide. This is a more comprehensive look at the vessels. Again, it's kind of small on my screen, but on the left-hand side, you see where the water comes over from the pump. It goes into chemical injection. That water is run through the separator. And then you get a look at each of the 5 sand skids. Each of those cylinders represents 2 sand vessels, 10 vessels in total. Once that is run through, that filtered water is then piped over to the bag filters, which you see the 2 sets of 2 trains of bag filters. That combined water then runs through your 2 treatment structures, each with 2 trains inside of each structure. That's combined and then effectively discharged to the outfall structure. Again, the picture is small, but at each of these red dots, you'll see sample ports. So this is how we're monitoring the system as it runs through all of the components, both separators, sand filters, bag filters, pre-GAC, post-GAC, pre-resin, post-resin, and for all of each train. So we've got a multitude of sample locations that allows us to track and monitor the progress. We can pinpoint if there's a problem with one train versus another, but it is a data collection that is ongoing. So right now, as we run the system through this startup, we're sampling 2 times a week through a majority of these ports. Next slide, please. So to back up, we had a system where we wanted to introduce a new structure. So the left-hand picture shows where we had to remove piping and insert our sand container, which is the right-hand side. Next slide. Next slide, please. Starting in the upper right, this is the inside of the sand vessel container. Just after it's arrived, so it comes in pre-built. You can see the 5 skids. The water flows from this direction down to the west. And then if we move over to picture number 2 in the upper left, you can see the new pipes configured coming out of the sand container and leading on over to bag filtration. And then the bottom photo is the installation of those additional bag houses and the reconfiguration of our pipe runs. Next slide. So with the system starting on 13th of July, we operated at our design 500 GPM. You can see the effects in the left-hand side photo of what the discharge box looks like when it's running at full capacity. This is just at startup where we still had the pond elevation water, or the elevation of the water going over the weir. So we're beginning the drawdown process. Within 1 day, the second day, this is the right-hand photo, we successfully got to below the weir elevation, and we are balancing the treatment gallons per minute, anywhere from 250 to 500 GPM per the runtime. And let's go to the next slide. After 10 days of operating, from July 13th, we successfully have pulled down a 1-foot drawdown. We've had no bypass. We've moved into today's recording where we're at about 16 inches of drawdown, and we're continuing to slowly pull that down. We've had no bypass or topping from the July 13th start date. Now, we've been fortunate. It's been a very dry, low flow window. We haven't had any significant rain. We've had some misting and some trace rains, but nothing that has elevated or increased the pond water elevation. And then a real kind of quick look from about a couple weeks ago, the impacts of the pond weed and algae growth. You can see it coming back around the shoreline. That's our intake pump. We're concerned by that biological growth, and that was the rationale for requesting a removal of the biologics growing in the pond. That's it. I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Doug. So I saw in our question module that Manna Joe had entered a question. So Manna, if you would unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yay, I found the unmute button.
Okay.
I just wanted, there was reference to a pesticide. It sounded like such a nice, friendly, commonly used pesticide, but I'd like to know the chemical name of that, please.
It's a chemical called Cutrim, and it's primarily a copper based pesticide. We have submitted a pesticide application with Region 3 of the New York DEC and have received approval. So we're just working with the property owners and Stewart Air National Guard to get the documentation ready and moving forward with that application.
Could you spell that, please?
It's capital C-U-T-R-I-N-E.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Manna. And then if we have some of our other RAC members that want to raise their hands. John Clark, you're at the top. Do you have a question to ask or not? How about Chuck Thomas? Oh, I might have accidentally just muted you. There you go, Chuck.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Doug, for the presentation. I was curious on slide 37. And again, I didn't write down everything as I went, and I don't have the deck open in front of me. But there were sandbag filters, which you had added, which were removing a total between the sandbag filters of 1.7 NTUs of turbidity, if I understood correctly.
Okay.
Yet in December of 2019, your turbidity values ranged from 3 to 53 NTU S's. And there was note that the rosin system recommends suspending operation at any turbidity exceeding 10 NTUs. So we've been blessed with a really dry, depending on how you look at it, my tomatoes are very unhappy, but a very dry summer here for doing this testing. If we had an episode where we're up to 50 NTUs of turbidity flowing into Rec Pond, you would have to shut down the system. Is that my understanding still?
That's a correct understanding. We are working with Stewart and the Air National Guard and the NGB on developing criteria to help us make those decisions. That turbidity of 53 was measured on the influence. So that's what's coming, from the pond into our system.
Right.
We think that's detrimental. Well, we learned that it was. Even with our reconfiguration and the addition of 10 sand filters and more bag filters, it makes sense to take precaution when a storm event. Let's use, for those that were local in July, on July 8th, we had tremendous rainfall of nearly 4 inches in a little over an hour. And our flow showed in excess of 1 million gallons over a 15 to 30 minute period. It completely swamped the pond, if you will. So those are type of criteria that we want to recommend to the Air Guard, that to sustain and work and maintain and protect our media, we would recommend a shutdown during a storm event of that magnitude. So we're working to try to find a appropriate storm event where we want to say it makes sense that we don't try to pump during that, because you can't pump at 500 GPM to stop the overflow.
I understand your thinking, and I agree with you. So if we're talking about, they say to suspend operation exceeding 10 NTUs, are we still getting an efficient operation at anything under 10 NTUs?
Yeah, we are really looking at about an average of 6 to 7 NTUs in the pond, even during this very dry, low flow. So we're still, and then our numbers are indicating that we are getting it down to 1.5 NTUs as it goes into the media, which is very close to our original goal and recommendation from our suppliers.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Manna and Chuck. It looks like our time is up for the questions for this section. Again, please enter them into the question module, and we'll try to address them either during the RAC open discussion or during the comment period at the end. If we can move on to our next section. And it looks like Nicole is back up again to talk about the community involvement plan.
Hi, everyone again. Yes, we are going to talk about the Community Involvement Plan update, which the acronym for that is CIP, or we pronounce it KIP. And I will try as much as possible to spell that out, but forgive me if I at times do say KIP. And I just wanted to remind too that we did with this briefing provide an acronym list. And so that's always something that you can refer to also if you're unsure.
Nicole, we seem to have lost your sound.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it back?
Yes.
How much did you miss?
The acronym list, I think, is about where we stopped. So.
Okay. And I was just basically saying that if we do use acronyms that you're not familiar with, please do look at the acronym list that was sent out with the briefing materials. Next slide, please. So the Community Involvement Plan is a document that's used as part of the CERCLA process, and it's a way to enable community involvement, to encourage community involvement. It's a living document, and by that we mean that it's periodically updated throughout the CERCLA process. There is actually a community involvement plan in the online AR already for Stewart. For this update, we will generally be following EPA's Superfund Community Involvement Handbook. Next slide, please. So the contents of the KIP, because some of you may not be familiar with what this is. A KIP summarizes the environmental restoration program, specifically discussing site history for environmental restoration sites. It also provides key demographic information for the community surrounding the base. It provides a background and a history of community involvement at the base. And one thing to note on this is that we're actually really fortunate at Stewart in that we've already exercised quite a few community involvement activities, with this Restoration Advisory Committee being one of those. And so across the nation, definitely not all guard installations have an operating RAC, and even DoD-wide installations don't have it. So we're really fortunate that we already have this avenue in place to be able to reach out to the community and solicit involvement from the community. So, but the purpose of this update is also to address any community needs, concerns, or expectations associated with community involvement. And how we will do that is by reaching out with a questionnaire as well as interacting with stakeholder groups. The questionnaire will be done via a SurveyMonkey link, and I will give a little bit more detail on the next slide as to the contents of that questionnaire. We then will gather the data and analyze the data from the questionnaire and present that in the Community Involvement Plan update, as well as assess whether the community involvement activities that are ongoing should continue, and if anything else needs to be changed regarding those activities. So on the next slide, that's already up there, thank you, we're showing a schedule of how we plan to implement this project. First off, we are working with a contractor as well as base personnel at Stewart to develop questions for that SurveyMonkey link, and those questions will be available in both Spanish and English. They are roughly 20 to 25 questions that range from things like how long have you lived in the area, what is your general awareness already of the environmental restoration program, have you attended any public meetings, any RAC meetings, are you aware that they are even ongoing? And then it leads into things like how would you like to get additional information about the environmental restoration program? Would that be via a website, fact sheet, TV, radio, what type of media, social media, etc.? And how often would you like to get that information? So that will all take place via the SurveyMonkey link. And how we will notify the public of the availability of this link is multifaceted, actually. First off, we will publish a newspaper ad that advertises the link, and that will be in both English and Spanish. We plan to do the 3 newspapers that we also advertise our RAC meetings in, so the same 3. In addition to that, we will have postcards that are mailed out to some of the residences in the surrounding area. It'll be random as to which households receive these, but we will put on the postcard, which by the way is also going to be in Spanish and English, we will put on there, please feel free to share this link with your neighbors. In other words, we're trying to encourage participation on this questionnaire, not isolating it to anyone in particular. And then the third way is that we are developing a list of stakeholders who will receive the letters via email. This is kind of a targeted list based on, first of all, RAC members, also federal, state, city elected officials, all the government stakeholders, DEC, Port Authority, Department of Health, that are already participating in this process. And also some of the environmental groups that are represented on our RAC and otherwise, groups such as Riverkeeper, Newburgh Clean Water Project, etc. So people on that targeted list will receive an emailed letter. Next on the slide, it just gives you a general layout of the time frame. We are tentatively planning on the SurveyMonkey link being active in September timeframe. It will be active for a period of approximately 2 weeks. And after that, our contractor will be compiling the responses, preparing the KIP update, and then proceed to our normal CERCLA document review process where we will get stakeholder input on the update. And then, of course, we will come back to the RAC at a future date and provide a briefing on the results of the KIP update. Next slide, please. On this slide, I have provided the Stewart Public Affairs representative, Master Sergeant Pastorello, and she just popped up there as well, as she is the point of contact for all community outreach related to Stewart. So with that, we open up to any questions that anyone has.
It looks like we have a question from Mary Wagner. So Mary, go ahead.
Thanks, Heather. Thank you, Nicole. It's good to hear about this questionnaire and the stakeholder interviews. I'm wondering, will some of the stakeholders be, or would you consider reaching out to local health organizations, school nurses? We have a nursing union, firefighters, fishermen. There's a lot of groups that we really want to reach. And I'm curious if you've considered them as stakeholder groups.
That's a possibility, Mary. I can't say for sure right now that our targeted stakeholder list includes all of those, but we are open. Sergeant Pastorello has talked about sharing the targeted list with the RAC co-chair, RAC members to solicit any input on if there are additional members of the community who should receive, or organizations that should receive, a targeted letter. And again, just to be clear, this is going to be advertised. You all are free to advertise the link wherever you want. I know Sarah will be advertising it on 105th media outlets as well as through the Orange County website as well.
Right. In addition to, we'll have those links throughout the papers, the advertisements. But Mary, we're going to send it to all of you stakeholders too, including Newburgh Clean Water, for their social media distribution. That's a good suggestion. We can reach out to unions, especially firefighters and nurses. I agree. So if you have other groups you want us to include on that link, just send them over my way and we will definitely include them.
Great. Thank you.
And I will open it up really quick if there's any other questions from RAC members on the KIP. If you would like to go ahead and raise your hand, we will get your question? If not, I think we'll save a couple minutes and move on to Nicole's next topic. So I'm not seeing any other raised hands. Nicole, if you want to move on.
Absolutely, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. So our next topic, I guess I'll wait for the slides to catch up. So there we go. Our next topic is on DoD and state memorandum of agreement. Of course, we love acronyms, so we call that DSMOA. And this is you can go to the next slide, Heather, thank you. We just wanted to point out that this is something that we are discussing tonight as a direct request from community members who had heard about discussions of a 2-year agreement that we were working on with the state. And so we've provided a few slides to provide an explanation of what this is. So again, DSMOA is a Department of Defense State Memorandum of Agreement. The goal of the program is to expedite environmental restoration at all DoD installations through enhanced partnerships with all 50 states and also the territories. DSMOA allows us to do this by compensating state regulatory agencies for expedited reviews of documents. So one thing that I did want to point out with this is that DSMOA does not determine the course and time frame for remediation activities. It's not a decision-making process as far as what projects will occur in that 2-year time frame, but we basically go through that internally, determine what projects will occur in the 2 years, and then we work with the state to come up with negotiated costs for the state regulatory agencies' involvement in the review of documents for that. And again, it's expedited reviews in order to make progress quicker on DoD environmental sites. So one last thing on this slide is that we negotiate that in a 2-year cycle that is called Joint Execution Plans, or another acronym there, JEPs. And the cycle just ended at the end of June, and a new cycle started on July 1st. And so that's why this has been an item of discussion. Next slide, please. However, ANG has participated in the DSMOA program for many, many years, decades, but we are currently not eligible to participate in it because the majority of our restoration sites were removed from the Defense Environmental Restoration Program, or DERP is the acronym we used for that. They were removed because of an Office of Secretary of Defense memo dated November 2017. Because of that, we no longer have the rights to participate in the DSMOA program. Now, I will note there's a sub-bullet that we may be allowed, based on the FY20 National Defense Authorization Act, we may be allowed for the Guard's PFAS, PFOA sites to be put back into the Defense Environmental Restoration Program. That's not definite. If it does happen, though, then we will certainly be looking at working back in DSMOA again and preparing a JEP amendment that would allow us to work those sites through DSMOA. But again, that is not definite, and it would not cover sites such as Site 3, which is the former base landfill. So because of that, ANG believes strongly in continuing our strong partnership with our state regulatory agencies, and we've been working really hard to come up with something that's a bit similar to DSMOA. We're calling it ANG, State Memorandum of Agreement, or ANGSMOA. And this has been a difficult process for us, a very time-consuming endeavor, because the DSMOA program is a nationwide program that is conducted through the Army Corps of Engineers. And they have developed all of the memorandums of agreement with the different state agencies. We kind of are starting from scratch and are having to develop for all the states and territories individual memorandums of agreement. And it's basically how we will get the funding and what funding mechanisms will be used and it's different funding than if we were in the DSMOA program as well. So this has been difficult for us, but we are persevering and working hard to get these set up for all of the states. So next slide, please. Okay, so that's a general description of DSMOA and ANGSMOA. Now let's talk about ANGSMOA specifically for New York. The good news is that the Guard and DEC have negotiated a joint execution plan. It includes environmental work through fiscal year 21, and it's for the 4 Guard installations that are in New York. So specifically for Stewart, the FY21 tasks in the joint execution plan include community outreach support, such as participation tonight and in future RAC meetings. Also, I just talked about the community involvement plan, so their participation in the questionnaire as well as in review of the KIP document. And then we have their participation in Site 3, that's the former base landfill, and we have annual long-term monitoring that goes on at that site. So their review of those reports as well as an associated 5-year review report. And then last on the list, we do have as a placeholder a PFAS RI task that is there in case it is funded in FY21. We don't know that it will be, but we wanted to provide that provision there. And if it is funded, we believe that we might be able to submit the work plan in FY21. And so that's the task that has been included in the joint execution plan and negotiated costs for it. So we have the JEP done. That's a big success. What we're now working on is the cooperative agreement on the Guard side to fund the state military department in New York, who will then pay the regulators invoices. And again, I just want to stress that it's a long kind of convoluted process to get through that cooperative agreement, but we are working it, and we are very hopeful that we will have ANGSMOA set up for New York in the fall timeframe of this year. So that's a summary of that 2-year agreement that some community members were asking questions about. Does anybody have any questions on that?
So I will go ahead. I believe Bill is representing the Quasset Creek, and Bill, you should be able to unmute yourself. Do you have a question about the ANG State Memorandum of Agreement? Bill, are you there? If your Bill may be having some technical difficulties, he will, I'm sure, submit some questions in the question module. He's been very good about that. If I will ask any other REC members, if you have questions about these agreements, please raise your hand. If not, we can go ahead and move on. Give it another couple seconds. It doesn't look like it. So let's move on to the RAC. Oh, wait, one moment. Victoria from Riverkeeper. I think, Victoria, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hi, so this is Victoria from Riverkeeper. I was wondering, since the enforceable agreements aren't in this ANGSMOA, do you know what document or what sort of enforceable mechanism these type of agreements will be put in?
Thank you, Victoria. As far as enforcement mechanisms, that's not really the purpose of this program. It's more to encourage expedited reviews of documents from state regulatory agencies. And so it's a way of compensating the state agencies to review our documents a little bit quicker, basically, so we can get through the CERCLA process faster. So I'm not sure if I answered your question. I might need more clarification if I did not.
Yeah, I was more asking about the Air National Guard's commitments to the cleanup process and the timeline. So you had said that those aren't part of this memorandum of agreement. So I was wondering if there was any other document or process where you would make those commitments in a concrete format.
I am not thinking of something in a concrete format. In general, we follow the federal cleanup law, which we've talked about, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act, which is CERCLA. And so we follow CERCLA, and we are in the process right now of completing the expanded SI. And again, we hope to have that report finalized in September. And at this point, then we will proceed with going through a process we call relative risk site evaluation, which is comparing the Stewart sites to other sites across the nation and determining basically treatment of worst first is essentially what we're doing. And so that's a process where we will evaluate and prioritize which sites will proceed to the RI first. We are in the middle of doing that, and we are hoping to have the RRSE process done by the end of the calendar year timeframe. And then we will also need to have funding. Once we have that prioritized list, we will also need to have funding to proceed forward with that remedial investigation. So that would be the next step. If you're referring specifically to PFAS, that would be the next step in the process.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
No problem. Thank
So,
you.
Victoria, this is Elaine McDenick. I just want to kind of follow up on your question. I just want to make it clear that regardless of the Guard being able to participate in DSMOA or having an ANGSMOA process set up, I mean, the Guard is still committed to the cleanup process. New York State DEC will still be our regulator. They will still be involved in the cleanup process as well. We want to be able to support them with money to review documents, to attend public meetings, to attend regulatory meetings, to just pay for the things that are involved in getting our cleanup goals quicker. But that doesn't mean we're not gonna, do our cleanup because we don't have an agreement or have a joint execution plan. And so I just want to make that point clear. It's something that we've done for decades, as Nicole has mentioned. We've participated in DSMOA. We sent money to all the states across the United States that have wanted to participate in DSMOA, and it's been very successful. We partner with our regulators on a regular basis, and we're disappointed that we can't participate in DSMOA. We've done everything that we can to try to utilize that tool and that mechanism, that authority, but unfortunately we just aren't able to. So we are setting up this parallel system called ANGSMOA to have a mechanism, and all these memorandums of agreement are required to be able to send federal money to these state entities. And so we want to continue to do that, but that doesn't negate our commitment and responsibility for cleanup.
So thank you. And with that, I think we have come to the end of our time. I know our next item, I believe on our agenda, if we can go to the next slide, is the RAC business. I do want to open it up to you, Chuck, if you have some final comments. It looks like we're about 15 minutes to 6 o'clock, or not to 6 o'clock, to 15 minutes from the end of our meeting, but we still want to make sure that we have time, like I mentioned at the top, to have those 20 minutes for public comments. So Chuck, if you could let us know if you have any final comments, if there's any RAC business that we need to discuss before we move on to those public comments, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Heather. Tried to get myself unmuted again. I was seemed to have lost my screen that I had my comments up on right then, and I'll have to go back to them. I think overall we've addressed a whole lot of issues tonight, and I do want to get on to the open discussion for everyone else. But I think a lot of our thought process, I know, is being driven by the initial disaster of losing our robust water system at Washington Lake. We have had this a robust water system in Washington Lake since before New York City had an aqueduct system, and before they had reservoirs serving New York City, Newburgh had a robust system that they had planned out. So it was really devastating to us to find this happening. But now we're seeing that some of this, that much of this has affected a wider watershed. We've got effects on Browns Pond. We've got effects on the Beaver Dam Lake tributaries. We've got Silver Stream effects. We've got wells in the towns of New Windsor and the towns of Newburgh that have been affected by PFOSs. And I'm just really torn with how we're going to move to a bigger picture when it's taken us basically 3 years now to assess that we've got a problem with Rec Pond. And I don't know how to even express that, how we go further to that big picture of where we need to go. And I thank you for bringing in all the different people, federal agencies, state and local agencies, to get them all at the table, get everybody at the table so we can think about how we can have drinking water again. So that's more of a, I think, rather than a question, than an observation of where I think we need to go. So thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. And again, we appreciate the time. So you mentioned earlier, we have an ongoing operating procedures discussion, which there will be a follow-up meeting on Friday with a smaller subcommittee. And so in essence of the time, we are going to go ahead and move forward with our public comment period. And thank you, everyone. We have lots of questions flowing in to that section. As I mentioned, we do want to dedicate those 20 minutes to that. So we will be going a bit past our 8 o'clock stop time so that we can accommodate that. We'll try to get through all the questions and statements that we possibly can. Again, if we don't happen to get to your question tonight, we will be working to respond to those questions. We have the ability to download them from the system and making those available to the public as we can get those responses put together. So I will start with our first statement. This is coming to us from Deborah Brown. Thank you, Deborah, for your statement. It says, I am a member of the Newburgh Clean Water Project. I have a statement rather than a question. I'd like to let everyone on the RAC and in the community know that our federal representatives are concerned and are actively aligned with our community to help get our water and soil cleaned up in this unfortunate situation. NCWP has been in touch with our senators who are particularly concerned and want to see a substantive, thorough, and clearly reported expanded site inspection with state-of-the-art benchmarks and best practices that correctly assess how much PFAS is in our soil and water and how it's making its way into our drinking water. It's critical to get this right since this is foundational for the remediation work to come. Any lack of data in the current ESI plan needs to be addressed. They'd like to know why the design process for the interim filter at the base was flawed and the filter failed. This filter sits at the top of our watershed because it's from there that Washington Lake gets contaminated. They're concerned that the interim filter was poorly designed and doesn't protect against contaminants getting into the water from normal storms. The expanded site inspection and report should include all the water sources affected by releases of PFAS chemicals from the base, not just Washington Lake, and not just in Newburgh. The community needs to know what specific plans the Air National Guard has for assessing, reporting, and remediating the PFAS in our soil and water in all the areas contaminated by the base. So again, thank you, Deborah, for that comment. I would like to open it up. Does anyone from our government team want to respond to that comment, or would like to move on to the next question? So moving on. Oh, Nicole?
I don't know that I could respond to all of that, but I did just want to make one comment because I've seen it consistently about looking at multiple receptors and not just Lake Washington. And I wanted to clarify that our focus on Lake Washington has been because that is the receptor where we have knowledge that the drinking water has exceeded the lifetime health advisory. And so we want to ensure that no one in the public is drinking water above the lifetime health advisory. And so that is the primary focus right now based on that, as well as based on hydrology, groundwater flow direction, surface water flow direction, et cetera. And so we will, I want to make clear in the RI, you know, again, this was just an SI and an expanded SI. Basically, those are typically done to determine presence or absence of contamination, and a lot more investigation occurs in the remedial investigation. That's where we look at full nature and extent. We evaluate migration pathways. We look at the risks associated with the contamination, much, much more in-depth investigation. And so we will be broadening our look based on migration pathways in the remedial investigation. But I wanted to explain that was why the focus now was primarily on Lake Washington. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Elaine Magdenick with the Air National Guard. I would just like to make a comment about the nature of PFAS coming from the Guard. I mean, obviously the PFAS UFOA that we're seeing is primarily from the use of the AFFF, the firefighting foam that the Guard has used, and the rest of the Department of Defense, and a lot of the airline industry also uses the same foam. But the firefighting foam only consists of about 6% of the PFAS that was manufactured in the country. And so there's a lot of other sources that we recognize, although we can't investigate all sources. We can only focus our investigation on what the Guard has released, and that's why we are in the very early stages of investigating and understanding what PFASs have been released and where they're headed. And so we do recognize that this needs to be a comprehensive cleanup, a process that we need to work with other stakeholders, other groups that have released PFAS that have reached waterways, and as the Department of Defense mentions, that there needs to be a whole of government approach, right? A comprehensive national plan, because there's PFAS that has been released, and we've been exposed through many different sources, and I don't even want to begin to understand what that looks like. But I agree that this needs to be a group effort, particularly when there's other sources that may be contributing to recreation pond. You know, we're still in the very early stages of understanding what that is. We are working with Port Authority to really understand, you know, what other sources are entering there, and certainly working with DOT to understand how we can reduce the amount of water going to recreation pond, because in the end, you know, we can't run every drop of water through these treatment systems, and because it's just overwhelming when we have these large stormwater flows. So it is a long journey that we're on as we go into our next phase, which is a remedial investigation phase. It is going to be a comprehensive investigation to understand, you know, groundwater and soil and where it's headed, and kind of delineate the plume, so to speak, and this is just something that we're going to have to work together on with other stakeholders and other potentially responsible parties.
Thank you, Elaine and Nicole. Our next question is from Bill Fetter. I think it follows on to the statements that you just made. It is, why is Silver Stream the only route of conveyance being investigated? The Jackson Avenue stream impacts individual wells en route to and around Beaver Dam Lake. Where is that contamination coming from?
So my understanding location-wise is Beaver Dam Lake is to the southwest, and currently the data we have is showing groundwater flow to the south-southeast. And so again, our primary focus was on Lake Washington, where we had exceedances of the lifetime health advisory to the south-southeast. Based on groundwater flow, but also based on the surface water flow going from Rec Pond to Silver Stream and then to the diverter. So, you know, as we stated, we will be in the RI looking more extensively and following, delineating the contamination and looking at where that contamination is going, what pathways it's going on, and what different media. So there will be additional investigation, but we are going to follow the contamination coming from Stewart, not from potentially other sources.
Thank you, Nicole. The next question is also from Bill Fetter. I believe it relates to the interim stormwater treatment system. Are multiple trains run in series or parallel? Doug, are you still with us? Doug, I think you're on mute.
They're run together. Sorry about that.
All right, thank you. Our next question is from Marcel Barrick. How is Port Authority of New York and New Jersey working with the Air National Guard in the airfield cleanup? In the response to the RAC meeting on April 30th, Port Authority of New York and New Jersey responded to question 64 about the Atlantic aviation spill on April 13th. This means there were phone calls and some emails to reply to the RAC questions between Air National Guard and Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Aside from working with Doug Close on the interim stormwater treatment system, what communication is taking place between Air National Guard and Port Authority of New York and New Jersey? Are there regular meetings? Why not? Nicole, I don't know if you want to take this one or if there's someone from Port Authority. I know there was one or two individuals. If you would raise your hand, if you would like to also respond, we can unmute you.
Well, this is Elaine Magdenick again. I will comment that the Air National Guard has reached out to New York DOT specifically on the 17K line. We are willing to talk to New York DOT to look at what we can do to reduce the amount of flow and concentration out of the 17K line. As you recall, we did provide funding through a military construction cooperative agreement to DOT last year, and they were able to do some piping scoping, and we did find, there were cracks in the pipe. There were areas that were compromised that would definitely contribute to PFAS concentrations in the stormwater. And so we would like to, develop a plan with DOT to, either, mitigate or reduce those concentrations through slip lining the pipes, or maybe even, talk about diverting the flow completely to be able to reduce the amount of water going to Rec Pond.
Thank you, Elaine. Our next question is coming from Jennifer Rollison. So, and again, I believe this is related to the interim stormwater treatment system. So we would be adding more chemicals to resolve issues of chemicals contaminating our water. How does that seem appropriate?
Yeah, hey, I'll take that one. Can you guys hear me loud and clear?
We can, Robert. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So this is Robert Silva-Savage. So there's a process for that to use a pesticide that's coordinated through the New York State DEC. So they have that authority to allow the use of those chemicals as necessary. So it is a fairly routine practice to use this certain type of pesticides in various lakes and ponds throughout that New York region. So I guess it's risk versus benefit here, and there's right now a determination being made to ensure there isn't PFAS in that pesticide. But if we can't get down the weeds, then you can't operate the treatment system, and then you're back to your original problem. So it's a risk versus benefit, but we're not just kind of willy-nilly using this pesticide on our own. We're doing it in conjunction with the DEC, who oversees that process.
Thank you. A follow-up question from, or not follow-up, but an additional question from Jennifer Rollison. On July 8th, July 8th caused massive flooding. How did testing look that particular week, prior to and after that date?
This is Doug Close. With regard to testing at the interim stormwater treatment system, we weren't online. I mean, it was days before we wanted to test it or turn it on. So we didn't conduct any PFAS testing or treatment testing on July 8th because we were still under construction.
Thank you. Our next question is from Marcel Barrick. Actually, I'm going to move on to, I think that question was responded to. So our next question is from Emily Vale. Along with turbidity, were nutrient levels also measured in Rec Pond or in the outfalls? Can you clarify if turbidity was originating from the outfalls or if it was from within the pond itself during storms, and where it was measured? The expanded site inspection presentation mentioned that stormwater volume was a concern for the filter. Can you speak to that from your perspective? And I believe that is also for the interim stormwater treatment system.
Well, I can speak to it in a general sense. we're affected by the stormwater flow by not only volume, but the velocity. And the velocity of the water coming down those pipes at such a rate is instrumental in creating turbidity. I don't know if that's an answer for her question, but the turbidity that we're dealing with is coming from the pond.
All right, thank
And
you.
Doug, the other question was, do we measure nutrient levels?
We've been looking at the nutrient levels to a certain degree in all our water quality samples, and we originally found no real smoking guns to indicate anything that would have created oxidation in our media. Nothing that stood out to us as far as nutrient testing.
Okay, going back to Marcel's question, I will put it out there. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is a major stakeholder in the cleanup of the airfield. Can the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey be given a seat on the RAC? And again, if someone from the Port Authority wants to raise their hand and respond to that question, we will open up the line to you. If not, I don't know if Elaine or Nicole want to field that question.
Well, Sarah did respond to that question, that they have been offered a seat, and we, welcome them because they are, a significant stakeholder in this process, and we do have to work very closely with Port Authority because it is their land, it is their pond, and so we do want to involve them in our decisions and certainly inform them on anything that we do there because we have to get approvals to do anything that we do at Rec Pond.
Thank you. I don't see a hand from the Port Authority. Maybe they had to pop off. So we will move on to the next question from John Clark. Is this a first for our filter design across the nation? It looks like the design can be replicated and be portable.
And this is Doug, and that's a great observation. It is designed for that very fact. We have used it on other DoD facilities. This is a particularly interesting challenge because of the stormwater flow. That has not ever been tried, where you would be designing a system to pump low flow at 500 GPM throughout the year to maintain a steady state, but then suddenly be asked to pump or try to treat 20, 30, 40,000 gallons discharging over the weir. So yes, it is a portable, mobilized, rapid type of piece of equipment to get into the field and treat right away.
Yeah, and what makes this particular situation challenging is the fact that we have stormwater, which is very different from drinking water or groundwater. If you recall, I mean, stormwater is everything that flows off when it rains, the water that's in your parking lot and on the ramp, on the airfield, and just all the stuff that gets washed away and enters into Rec Pond. And that's a huge challenge because you don't have complete control over what is included in that water. So this particular situation, I think, and I'm not, an expert on what is happening across the country, but just sharing, this concept with other DoD peers, you know, they're not really focused on treating stormwater per se, that these granulated activated carbon systems and resin systems are mostly treating drinking water or groundwater, and that water doesn't have the same turbidity concerns or nutrient concerns that we're facing at Rec Pond.
All right, and it looks like we are basically at the end of our 20 minutes for public comment. I know that went very fast. I will put out there one last question for our group, and then maybe we can go to some closing comments. This last question will be from Bill Fetter. Who designed the rec pond?
This is Doug. I would have to say it was a Port Authority, is a Port Authority property. It's probably registered with the state as a dam. If that's answering the question correctly. Who built Rec Pond? Did I get that right?
I think that might have been a stumper for some of the others on the group. So we can definitely, we'll see if there's anything else that comes out of it. But I would like to thank everyone for participating. Again, I know there were so many questions that came in. As we mentioned, we will be downloading those questions and providing written responses. If there are other questions that you didn't get into the module and we still have a little bit of time if you want to fastly type those in, any questions that come after the meeting, please feel free to send them to Mary Wagner. She's been such a wonderful member of the RAC to coordinate all of those questions and send them in on behalf of the RAC. So her email's up there to send those questions in, and then additional written responses will be provided to those questions. I would like to open it up to Colonel Kelly and Chuck Thomas if you would like to make any closing statements before we end tonight.
Sure, there never seems to be enough time, and there's more questions than we have time to answer. So as Heather indicated, please get those in and we'll do our due diligence and get a detailed answer back to you. Thank you again for your patience, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to meet in person at Newburgh Armory. I believe in October is the next scheduled date. So until then, thank you and keep the questions coming. Take care. Chuck, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Colonel Kelly. I'm just going to want to reiterate how pleased I am at the collegial nature that our discussions have taken. You know, our consultants have treated the questions coming at them with respect, and I think that's really important. And I think everyone's working towards the greater good, and I think that's real key to what the RAC process was intended to achieve. And I like to think we're a shining example of how that can go forward. So I want to thank all the audience members and all the participants for their participation tonight, and the fact that the community has come out again and listened to this. I think it really means a great deal going forward. And I do want to thank the ATSDR for participating in this, and we'll be getting word out about the testing in Newburgh in the fall. Looking forward to working on that. And thank you all, Heather, for your time and expertise, and also Mary Wagner for all the wonderful work she has done. So thank you.
So thank you, Colonel Kelly and Chuck Thomas, again, our co-chairs. I do also want to point out that a link was shared with the group and from Mary Wagner and really from our RAC on the questions that came out of the April meeting, where those are available. I believe it's through the Newburgh Clean Water Project, in addition to being available on the administrative record site for the Air National Guard and for Stewart Air National Guard base. Again, thank you everyone for participating. We look forward to seeing you at our next meeting. And again, make sure you get those questions in. The slide presentation and materials that come out of that will be made available on the administrative record website, and we will notify the RAC and try to get the notice out to all of the participants when those materials are made available. Again, tonight's meeting was being recorded, so once that recording is uploaded, I would say probably within the next week, we will also make those notifications about the recording, as well as start to make the actual transcript available. We will kind of keep those communications out there. Thank you again, and have a good evening.